what they've passed. So far, we haven't passed anything, have we?
No, and I think what this shows me is that once you bestow a benefit to the population,
yes,
a certain segment starts, benefiting from that and happy with it and all of that. Even if some people hate it, it is so hard to take it away. And you can explain, you can show them the reason why it's actually going to be better for them. But when people see something being taken away from them that they've started to depend on, and it hasn't even been that long. So I think that's a play here, and that's one thing that makes it very difficult. Now, next week there's going to be some more things happening, probably, and I do think that anything good is worth working for and trying for. So I hope they don't give up, but I also don't want to see something so Obamacare light that it's not that different.
Yes. Merrill Matthews, thank you for being here. And again, you certainly bring a lot of expertise here, but you have any prediction at all about what's going to happen next week?
I don't have a prediction at all. I don't think Mitch McConnell has a prediction other than he said we'll have a vote next week.
On something.
Maybe.
Yes.
And I think that part of that depends upon whether or not Senator John McCain is going to be able to get there. If they postpone the vote this week because John McCain wouldn't be there, and if McCain, having had the announcement that he's got cancer and he's undergoing treatment and so forth, I understand he'll still be able to travel and so forth, but can he travel next week? And would they hold a vote if they can't get him if he's going to vote for it? Who knows?
Yes. Well, again, this is the kind of world we find ourselves in. But why did we get to a point where there was no vote? I mean, again, for many of our listeners, they may know that, but help us understand, because you obviously need at least 50 votes, and it seems to me that you were peeling off occasionally a moderate. Of course, Susan Collins did not vote for repeal before in 2015, so we understand that. But then it was a number of conservatives, and that became sort of a done deal, right?
Yes. He had the problem of losing moderates on the Medicaid expansion that they wanted to scale back on, and losing conservatives on a number of things that they did, including not eliminating all the taxes and so forth. Then Ted Cruz came up with what looked like a pretty good compromise plan, and
right.
It's hard to know how all these things interact, but I would argue that it at least allowed the insurance market to work again, and might very well have created a functioning market for states that decided to move with that. But then that was a Cruz-Lee plan, and then because of some changes they made in putting in the law, they lost Mike Lee, and so now we're back to not having 50 votes again.
I heard that, Donald Trump really engaged this week, and he had a lunch with the senators,
right.
and he's putting pressure on people, and I understand that he had a conversation with Mike Lee, and, Lee has been, he's very conservative, and he always sticks to his principles. And in this case, buddy, I need to understand, I don't quite understand the problem that he had with the Consumer Freedom Amendment. I know that what it did was allowed some insurance companies to offer scaled down plans, or plans that didn't cover every mandate, as long as there was an Obamacare compliant plan that was being sold. So people could have a free market in insurance. It's a very good idea. I think that it was scaled back to please some moderate senators, and that was what Lee had a problem with. But can you explain it a little further?
His primary stated concern was that it wouldn't lower premiums as much as it should be in those newly created plans. And here's why. Little complicated, but here's why. Under Obamacare, insurance pools have to be lumped together into one big pool. That way you're cross-subsidizing people, young, healthy people cross-subsidizing others. Under the what should have happened in this, and the way Ted Cruz had initially envisioned it, is those who were opting out and going to the other policies that could be created, that would be a separate pool. So that pool would be one pool, and those people who decided to stay in Obamacare policies would still be a separate pool. So that means the people opting out of Obamacare they'd probably be younger, healthy people, leaving the premiums lower. If you take those and have to sort of merge them in with the other pool, you're still going to have, the people in Obamacare are still going to have more expensive policies, but they would not go up as much because the people in the other pools would be subsidizing them, cross-subsidizing a little bit. Mike Lee said that was not going to be able to give them as low insurance premium policies as they should have. And because of that, he didn't want to support it. So it's kind of complicated, but it ultimately means that those people who are opting out would still be paying more in premiums than they otherwise should be.
So what would have happened under that to the high-risk people? Would that have been completely separate from the Obamacare policies and the consumer freedom type policies? Would it have been like a different pool?
It's hard to know. I mean, arguably, I would argue that people who were sicker would move into Obamacare policies. Healthier people would move into the non-Obamacare qualified policies. But as I've said in a piece in Forbes, there's a lot of factors in this. If I'm getting a lot of subsidies and those subsidies go up, if my premiums go up as they would under the Obamacare policies, then maybe I stay in anyway. I mean, I might be willing to stay in because I'm being subsidized. So you expect some what we call adverse selection, a pool getting more sick people than it should, but you don't know how much that is. And there's a whole lot of money in the Republican plan to funnel to the insurers through the back door, as 2 states, Maine and Alaska, have already done under Obamacare, to keep the premiums lower, which might mean more people stay in there and you might not have the risk segmentation that they're expecting.
Now, again, if they don't stay in, you have what's called the death spiral, right? And again, that's a situation where because the premiums go up, more and more healthy people leave. So the premiums get more expensive and the pool gets sicker and sicker. And right now we're in a death spiral, aren't we?
Absolutely. We're in a death spiral in the individual market anyway. And so that's one of the reasons why Republicans have these, what they call a stability fund, to funnel money to the insurance companies to say, if you're going to take these high risk people, high cost people, we're going to hand money to you through the back door. It's called an invisible risk pool. Yes. It's a little different than a standard risk pool, but it's an invisible risk pool. That was sort of perceived as a way to allow that to continue to function, keep the premiums lower than they otherwise would have been. But Mike Lee felt like the other people, the people he was trying to help save and get lower premiums, would still end up having to pay higher premiums. At least that was his stated excuse.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, a couple of other things to talk about today. And if you'd like to join us at any point, 1-800-351-1212. Even if some of that sounded complex, it's a very good lead-in to one of the first articles we've posted here on healthcare. Try not to be too sweeping. Penna Dexter, you and I, if we've said it once, we have said it dozens of times, that every time the word comprehensive is put in front of something, comprehensive immigration, comprehensive health care reform, I don't care what it is, that always is a problem. And if people were saying, wow, all these details that Dr. Merrill Matthews is talking about, you haven't seen the half of it. So that's why maybe dealing with some of those in a piecemeal way makes some sense. We'll talk about that. But also we have a piece by Dr. Merrill Matthews, Lessons from the Republican Healthcare Disaster. Might do a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking as well. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if you ask people around you about summer jobs that they have had, you will notice a generation gap. The older people will recall some of the jobs they held as teenagers. The younger people may not have had any summer jobs. 40 years ago, nearly 60% of U.S. teenagers were looking for or working at summer jobs. Last year, that percentage was just 35%. Some of that decline is due to the lack of summer jobs, but much of it is due to fewer teenagers looking for a summer job. Carl Vick, writing in Time magazine, says that the Jenkins Boardwalk went looking for seasonal employees last year. In order to fill some 1,200 summer vacancies, they held an Easter time job fair that drew just 400 people. More and more summer jobs are either going unfilled or being filled by foreign students or family and friends. If teenagers aren't working, what are they doing? Of course, some are chilling out in front of television and video games, but many more are busy, but they aren't working at summer jobs. They may be doing volunteer work or doing an internship. Those activities look good on resumes for students trying to get into the college of their choice. Many are taking summer school classes. Summer school used to be for students who did not do well in school and needed enough hours to graduate. Carl Vick explains that many more students are taking courses as an academic accelerator. Last July, 40% of 16 to 19-year-olds were enrolled in summer school. Other students are playing sports. Youth sports have now expanded into a year-round, all-consuming activity for kids and parents. Many simply would not have time for a summer job because their scheduled lives are full of games and tournaments. Sadly, many students won't learn the valuable lessons many of us learned in our summer jobs. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Going to spend a fair amount of time today talking about healthcare reform. And the first article that we've posted here is on healthcare, Try Not to Be Too Sweeping. It's by Fred Bauer. He says, make the healthcare debate about the future, focus on expanding healthcare options, and many of the others. In studio with me today on our weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. And Penna, we have said this so many times. Anytime I see the word comprehensive, I know it's a disaster because you try to do too many things. And when we're talking about 1/6 or 1/7 of the economy and all the moving parts, how in the world could you ever begin to even believe that you could begin to do things that are not going to have unintended consequences when you get into healthcare?
Yeah, and on healthcare, I think we should go back, 8 years now? Dr. Matthews and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that if we really truly wanted to target people that were uninsured, you could have done that very easily without taking over the whole system. And, that's being now proven so right and true because the system is spiraling down. If the free market had been left, it wasn't perfectly free, but if it had been left alone, and then, the problems with pre-existing conditions, that was a problem for certain people, but it's not this huge number. It's not, half of the population or anything. And so the problems were overstated, which means the fix was overdone. And you cannot possibly, as planners, anticipate everything. So a comprehensive plan for immigration reform or, anything, it's impossible to do it because you can't think of every eventuality. You're always going to have a new one to come up. So better, I think, to, first of all, let states innovate and leave a lot at the state level, but also better to do it piecemeal. And, I don't mind the repeal only idea. I think it would be a good idea, and then start adding fixes and doing things along the way instead of doing it all at once.
Well, I agree with you. And if they had done the repeal right off the bat, as the plan had been, then they could have done instead. Now let's come back and don't necessarily do
like in January. You mean?
Like in January, right?
Okay, yeah.
But that was the initial plan, as we've talked about. Rand Paul stepped in and said, "No, we've got to do these things together." They didn't have a comprehensive plan ready yet, and so that meant they had to wait a couple of months to get their comprehensive plan, which they couldn't pass, and the House had to go for another month, and the Senate waited. Remarkably decided to wait till the House passed its legislation before it decided to start on it. I'm amazed at this stuff. But had they done the repeal, then they could have come up and said, all right, we want to make sure low-income people can afford health insurance. One thing is subsidies. Obamacare had subsidies. Let's look at how we do subsidies. We'll do a subsidies bill. Then we'll come up and we want to make sure people with pre-existing conditions who are uninsured have a safety net to be able to go into. So let's do some kind of safety net bill which either requires insurers to accept some, that's what was in Obamacare, creates a separate safety net to capture those people, some kind of safety net bill. Then they could have just done these, as you say, piecemeal. They would have gotten, I think, bipartisan support for it.
Yeah.
And then if they had made a mistake, because you can't always figure these things out, then they would have been able to come back and say, well, we messed something up. Let's come back and do a technical corrections that'll fix this problem and go forward. But that's not the plan now. At least we'll see. If they come back next week and are able to do a repeal bill, then they could come back and do exactly what we're talking about. But I'm not sure they got the votes for the repeal only now.
Yes.
Do you think it's a little toxic in the Senate now because
little?
some of the senators have their backs up
Yeah.
now? So to do the repeal only now, the moderate senators, or
Right.
I think they're pretty liberal. Some of these senators, would they ever be able to be convinced to support
I think it's
repeal
going to
only?
be very hard to do a repeal only bill. If McConnell thought he had the votes for that, he said next week we're going to vote on something. We'll see. If he thought he had the votes for the repeal only, maybe he would. I think he'd be touting that, but I don't know that they have the votes for that now.
Well, we'll take some phone calls in just a minute if you'd like to join us. Maybe you have some thoughts about health care reform and what you would want to see that would help you and your family. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, one of the things that we've made available to people, lessons from the Republican health care disaster, lessons 1, 2, and 3. And one of them is lesson 1. When you have a mandate with momentum, act on it.
Right.
And that's what you were saying back in January. But since, on Wednesday when we have the millennials here, these kids were in grade school when we talk about what happened in 1992 with Bill Clinton. But since we've got some older people around the table, remind us about how, in some respects, they could have learned a lesson from 1992 when Bill Clinton was elected president, and then they gave Hillary Clinton the responsibility to craft legislation.
Right. Bill Clinton campaigned on comprehensive health care reform. He won. He felt that was a mandate. So when he got into office, instead of sort of moving directly and saying, Congress, here's 10 principles I want you to do, and then go on, they set up a secret committee, became a big issue. Was Hillary leading it? Was Hillary not leading it? Can the First Lady lead a presidential commission sort of thing? Took them 6 months to develop it. Finally came out with their legislation, if I remember right, in October of 93. They get handed over to the House and Senate. The Senate, led by Democrats, said, thank you so much. We're going to do this ourselves. We're breaking for Christmas, and we'll come back and start on January. By that time, a year later, they had lost that momentum, and people who were critical of it were beginning to say, I think we may be able to beat this thing. And even though a lot of Republicans were willing to sign on to some kind of comprehensive reform, they were never able to get the votes they needed to pass something. And so by the fall, it was dead, and then Republicans took over Congress after that.
Yeah, it sounds a little bit like deja vu, It may be, as we sometimes say around here, it is not that history repeats itself, but it sometimes rhymes and comes back with some of the same kind of thing, because that's exactly what happened. Because as you point out here, when Rand Paul and a few others, including the president, so let's give credit or blame
but
wherever
he was
it's
the one
due.
who said he claimed he convinced the president to do it.
So then they said, well, we have to do repeal and replace, and that just postponed it so long.
Right.
And back to the other point you made, just before I get to Penna's comments as well, the Senate, it's not like they didn't know the House was working on this. I don't understand, first of all, how you can sit around 7 or 8 years and then look like you're caught off guard. But I really don't know how you can be in the United States Senate and wait until the House does anything before you start anything in the Senate.
Which is exactly if you're going to campaign on repeal and replace, have a replacement bill. And they never did it. Paul Ryan came up with a outline June of last year, which was a pretty good outline, and what would be sort of the text. But he never actually had legislative language.
Right.
And even if Senator John Thune said a week or so ago on television, well, we didn't think we were going to win the White House. November 9 in the morning, you got the White House. Yeah. So then you say, we're canceling Christmas vacation, and you guys have got to work on this thing so that come January 20th, we have a plan. And they didn't do it. And I'm still mystified by this.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about, I asked you about Mike Lee, and these are conservatives we're talking about. Rand Paul. Okay, Rand Paul said, okay, we cannot do repeal only, and he had a pretty strong voice there at the beginning with Trump. But now he wants to do repeal only.
Right.
He doesn't like the fix. He says it's too much like Obamacare light.
He was against it before he was for it.
So do you have any explanation for that?
I think it's the only option they have right now. So he's not been supportive of the Republican plans in the House and the Senate, feeling like they don't cut taxes enough, don't provide enough freedom, don't free up the market enough. So the repeal only is sort of the plan, the fallback plan, and he's not saying much about the fact that that was the plan initially in January, and he fought it.
Yeah. Well, again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Again, Penna, we've got when you have a mandate with momentum, act on it. Number two, when you say you want to replace legislation, have a replacement plan ready. And then lesson number three, learn how to market an idea. It does seem to me that the messaging and the marketing hasn't been very good.
It's been terrible, but the Republicans are like that on everything they try to do. Right now, what you'd expect is you would have people, the Republicans, either them or a PAC or somebody would be running ads with people who are saying, I lost my health insurance. I've lost it 2 or 3 years in a row. Can't afford the premiums. I understand there's some things that are online or something like that, but they're not getting many views. You have to create an atmosphere in the country where people look at this and say, that's terrible. We need to do something about that. And they've simply not done it. And they're letting the media and Democrats define this thing. And we're hearing every day from them about who this will hurt, but we're not hearing from Republicans about who Obamacare hurt.
I saw a statistic.
Yeah.
Republicans ran 30,000 ads on Obamacare in 2014. That's how they've done so well. Why can't they do the same thing now on Obamacare repeal?
Good point. Well, again, we've talked about the fact that they have not heard from certain individuals, but I can see hearing from you because the computer is lighting up with some phone calls. When we come back, we'll take some of those calls. 1-800-351-1212. Got a couple of articles here, one that you might want to see on healthcare. Try not to be so sweeping. We mentioned Dr. Merrill Matthews' piece, which you can also find at IPI. And we would encourage you to go to IPI.org, which is the Institute for Policy Innovation. And we'll take some of those phone calls, too, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take those calls from you right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio with us, and we're focusing on the subject of health care. So let's go to some phone calls. First of all, we'll head to North Carolina on the Good News Network. David, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hi, thanks for having me, sir. It's always a pleasure to listen to you guys.
What would you like to...
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I have a question/statement. One, I am one of those quote-unquote people that's on Obamacare. I am low income. I work very hard for the money I get. My wife and I, we run our own business. I was in prison, so I couldn't get a job, so I started my own business. Obamacare was the first time that my wife and I and our 4 kids, 2 of which were from a previous relationship, were able to have insurance. And now I don't know, I'm sorry, I wasn't on at the beginning, but the lady who was on there, and I don't mean to sound sexist in any way, said that we should have repealed it to begin with. Why repeal something and leave everybody that's on it uninsured and unable to pay medical bills? I guess I wanted you to help me understand that, why you would do that. What's the cause behind that?
That wouldn't, repealing it would not translate into leaving everybody uninsured. There would have to be something done. That was me that said that. But it's just that the other point that we made was, don't take a whole system and change it when there's a certain sector of the economy, you were part of it, that had a need, and target that instead of changing the entire system, because that has not worked.
David, back in 2009, when President Obama came in, there was widespread agreement among Republicans and Democrats that they wanted to be able to provide some type of subsidy for lower income people to make sure they could afford health insurance. And if the president had been willing to go with that, they could have done that, would have gotten wide bipartisan support. And I think we don't know what that would have looked like, but I suspect it would have been something fairly similar to what we're doing right now under with the subsidies under Obamacare, because the Republicans' proposal isn't that much different. It's a little bit different, but it's not that much different. And so the repealing of Obamacare would simply say that the current structure of the subsidies would pass away, and that there would be a new system of subsidies available with insurance companies required to accept everybody who applies. And so that sounds a lot like Obamacare, and some of the reasons some of the conservatives oppose it is because they feel like it does sound too much like Obamacare.
Okay. That makes it a whole lot clearer for me. Thank you for answering my question.
Sure. What about that? The president promised that if you like your policy, you can keep your policy. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If I understand what Ted Cruz is proposing, he's actually trying to make that possible, isn't he?
It's exactly right. This sort of demonstrates how much the media and the left dominate the marketing of what's going on here. Because people say, well, my goodness, if they repeal Obamacare, I'd have terrible options for insurance. Insurance options were good prior to Obamacare. I would argue they were better prior to Obamacare. So much so that the president knew that the vast majority of people liked the coverage that they had. And so that was his campaign statement. If you like your health plan, you can keep your health plan. It was not true. PolitiFact called it the lie of the year in 2013. But there's a new narrative coming up saying, well, if we get rid of Obamacare, you won't have very good health insurance options. No, you might very well be able to have the health insurance plan that you had before Obamacare, in essence, finally fulfilling the president's promise. I'll tell you this. My wife had health insurance, a Blue Cross plan in Texas before Obamacare. We'd be thrilled if we could have that plan back at something like the premiums, or premiums plus some inflation or something like that. We can't get it because Obamacare eliminated that policy.
That happened to me. I was immediately terminated from my individual policy once Obamacare passed. But, there has been a report out. It's not the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, study on this. It's the Health and Human Services have a report out saying that this Consumer Freedom Amendment that Cruz has proposed, where there's different availabilities, they don't all have to be a full Obamacare plan. This report says that it expands coverage by more than 2 million individuals and would reduce premiums by an average of $7,000 a year. People who are considered high risk would actually pay about $380 a month. I mean, that sounds like nothing now compared to some of the premiums people are paying. This would be down from a projected average of $845 a month. And then, that would be under, so getting the Consumer Freedom Law or amendment to this repeal would actually bring us back to reasonable premiums. And I think that's what, first of all, politically, that's important for senators. But second of all, Americans will have health care again. And then you work on those who can't even afford the $380 a month. There's ways to deal with that.
What this demonstrates is the difference between the actuaries at Department of Health and Human Services and the actuaries at the Congressional Budget Office.
For sure. Yeah.
Because they believe that the mandate is so effective, and they've always overprojected how many people will get health insurance under this. They in the 2016 version of the CBO, they were looking at this expecting 27 million people covered under Obamacare, that is in the individual exchanges. They dropped that in their projections this year down to around, I think, 20 to 21 million people covered, maybe. But there was 18 to 19 million Americans in the individual market prior to Obamacare.
Yeah.
So and they weren't getting any subsidies for this. So a lot of this depends upon how what your actuaries think about it. And I'm going to lean with the HHS actuaries in this because I think they're closer to right than the CBO.
One of the things we try to teach people listening to Point of View is to have some discernment. We did that yesterday with Austin Ruse in the second hour. And here's a good example. When you see the media covering what the CBO has, the Congressional Budget Office, and ignoring what the Department of Health and Human Services, that shows a bias because one shows how awful any kind of repeal would be. The other shows how beneficial it would be. So again, you need to be more discerning and read widely.
Right. And the CBO, I would argue, sometimes comes out with good projections on things, but oftentimes they come out with bad projections because they tend to have a bias towards government, a bias towards mandates and regulations being effective. And they tend not to implement what we call dynamic scoring, which is really estimating what happens to the economy when people do various things that might end up increasing incentives to work and other things. They tend to underestimate those, and they're usually always wrong. The CBO has the worst record out there. They would rival most weathermen in how often they miss their predictions.
Great line.
And yet, that's the one that's become the standard that you have to go by.
Well, let's go back to the phones in Georgia. Marjorie, thank you for joining us today. What's your comment?
Oh, I'm so glad that I don't think I've ever spoken with y'all before. But anyway, I just wanted to make a quick comment. And that is to say that I'm 63 years old, and I've been in pretty good health up till now, but I don't have any insurance at this point because, so far I've been doing okay, but I've been wanting to get some insurance, but I do not like Obamacare, and I was waiting for it to be repealed. And so what I don't understand is why they just can't repeal it and say that it's going to take effect, like in 30 days or 90 days or 180 days or whatever.
Yeah, they keep saying 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years to wind it down because the insurance companies need some time to be able to create new policies. But Marjorie, I'd suggest if you want insurance, you are a perfect candidate for what's called a bridge policy. And those bridge policies are very inexpensive. They're really for catastrophic care. But one of the things that actually happened for a while there was insurance agents were selling bridge policies to people who didn't want to go into Obamacare. They usually last for 6 months. You can usually re-up it for 6 months. Then after that second 6 months, you can go over to another company because something like 20 companies were selling these policies. And for people who were getting close to Medicare, that became something of a fallback for them. So much so that Department of Health and Human Services under Obamacare said, we got to stop these people from going outside the system here and not abiding by our mandates. And we're going to limit it to 3 months as opposed to 6 months, and you can only sell it once. I suspect, I haven't heard one way or the other, but I suspect Tom price could change that because it was just sort of mandated. But there is some options out there. They're very inexpensive. They're easy to enroll. I had to do it one time. It's just a one-page thing you filled out, and I had coverage. So you might want to consider that because you'll be Medicare eligible in the next couple of years.
You know, and Marjorie's a good example. She's from Georgia, and of course, many of my callers from Georgia said, we like the policy we had before. Now, it was a skinny policy, didn't cover as much, but I could afford it because it was $200, $300, $400. When you tell me that I have to buy a policy that's $1,000 a month and then has deductibles, I'm paying for something I'll never, ever use, and I can't afford it.
Absolutely. And these days, $1,000 a month, if you're lucky.
Yeah, I was choosing a small number because, as you will
the new
know,
premiums will be coming out here in another couple of months.
Me they spend $20,000 a year for a policy they know they'll never use.
Yes.
That just wears me out. Let's take a break. We've got some more phone calls, and we will take those. And if you have some other comments or questions, privileged to have in studio with us today, Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews, and they will respond to your questions and comments right after this.
Calls for $15 hourly minimum wage laws are being answered in certain places across the country. Just this July 1st, 17 states and localities increased their wage floors. Seattle started phasing in a $15 minimum 3 years ago, and there's little to celebrate. It's hurting low-wage workers. A University of Washington study shows business establishments are simply cutting workers' hours to compensate. The average low-wage worker is losing $125 a month. San Francisco's $15 minimum is nearly phased in. Other Bay Area cities are following suit. One result? Restaurants are closing in droves. A joint study done by researchers at Harvard Business School and Mathematica Policy Research found that for every $1 per hour hike in the minimum wage, there is a 14% increased likelihood that a restaurant rated 3.5 stars on Yelp will go out of business. The minimum wage push has many large restaurant chains beginning the automation process. Kiosks popping up at Panera Bread, McDonald's, and Wendy's mean customers barely interact with a human. There's even a meat flipping robot that can put out 360 evenly cooked burgers in an hour. Andy Putzer was CEO for 17 years of CKE Restaurants, the parent company of Hardee's and Carl's Jr. He is outspoken about his concern that government policies are destroying entry-level jobs by giving businesses an incentive to automate at an accelerated pace. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed, Mr. Putzer wrote, "It's no surprise that restaurants are rolling out the robots." Economist Walter Williams points out that the average wage for a cashier is $10 an hour. That works out to $21,000 per year. Not a fortune, but better, writes Dr. Williams, than going on welfare, needing unemployment compensation or idleness. Plus, these jobs, often the first jobs for young people, teach them the importance of soft skills like punctuality and clear communication. Minimum wage laws destroy these opportunities. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. Let's head out to Arkansas this time. Gene, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. What's your question? I think Gene is not listening, so let me ask it for him. He was just wanting to know the reason why people couldn't keep their health care plan with Obamacare. In other words, we were told if you like your plan, you can keep your plan. But the real answer to that is, Dr. Matthews, that Obamacare made any plan that was not compliant, and explain what compliant means as a policy that had to be canceled.
Obamacare included 10 essential benefits that was required to be covered, and then the Department of Health and Human Services sort of bumped things up and added that. So the Obamacare requires preventive care to be free. Then the question is, what's preventive care? And so that goes over to the Department of Health and Human Services, and that's why they decided that, say, for instance, contraception was considered preventive care, physicals were considered preventive care, and other things of that nature. So if it's preventive care, it becomes free. If you get a shingles vaccine, let's say, as people 60 and above are supposed to do, that becomes free under Obamacare, even though it might have cost, at least in the past few years, it was $100, $150, so it's fairly expensive. As a vaccine was. But if your plan didn't cover those things, then it's no longer qualified. So if you, for instance, as a plan, charge $10 for a copay for contraception, you're no longer a qualified plan and essentially outlawed.
Wow.
If you charge $20 for a physical, you're no longer qualified and you're outlawed. Because Obamacare said you can have no lifetime limits, if you had a $5 million or even a $20 million lifetime limit on the coverage, which very few people even hit $1 million over a year. If that's the case, you're no longer a qualified plan.
And then, of course, you have all the essential mandates as well. So, again, people that are over the age of 65 say, why do I have to have a plan that covers pediatric care, obstetrics, baby, pregnancy, all those kinds of things? So, again, all of those have to be checked, and anything that has like a copay or a limit was not compliant. So that's why all these really good policies people like just got thrown out.
Prior to Obamacare, you and I used to talk about state mandates that states passed requiring health insurance to cover various things that made it more expensive. Obamacare came in and it covered it basically required almost all of those things. So the state mandates issue is not really doesn't play much of a role anymore because in the vast majority of cases, Obamacare is more comprehensive than the state mandates. However, if the Ted Cruz provision comes in and insurers are allowed to offer those other plans, the state mandates roll back in. Another answer to this, this would be terrible insurance that doesn't cover anything. No, the state mandates become effective again.
Right.
So all those things that the states required would be back in play.
Well, this is something to talk to those senators from certain states where they're very worried about their constituents. For instance, states where they have a terrible opioid crisis, which, by the way, is partly caused by Obamacare. But so in that state, perhaps that state will have higher mandates or mandate that coverage for people that are involved in that kind of a crisis, or a lot of Medicaid recipients. Maybe the state will just have to pony up for a better Medicaid plan.
In most of the states, coverage for a pregnancy was there, especially in the small group market where states regulated it. They gave you a little more latitude in the individual market. Coverage for drug and alcohol abuse, that was in a lot of states that they required that. Right. Coverage for mental health. Now, they might have varied on how they covered it. Coverage for chiropractic care was mandated in an awful lot of states. They may have They may have said you have to provide 5 free, or it has to be charged the same rate as a physician, or something like that. But the states mandate a lot of those things.
Yes. Let's take some more phone calls because we certainly have a lot of you who want to ask a question or make a comment. So we'll head to Louisiana this time. WPAE and Todd, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, Kirby. Thanks for taking my call. Insurance is a fiasco. I think we'll never solve it. And I'm going to tell you why, Kirby. It's because it has evolved into this monster. You know what I'm talking about? It's a money scheme. And insurance is a money scheme. I hate to say it, Kirby, but before insurance was ever, invented, we went to the doctor and the doctors were satisfied with what they were making. But now it's just a hopeless case. I mean, they got so greedy that, I don't know what to say anymore. And if you don't think that's true, look at their houses, what they live in, Kirby. They live in mansions. And I'm going to give you an example, Kirby. My mother, 14. She died because her insurance ran out. And we treat humans like customers instead of like human beings. And that's a shame. I'm going to hang up and listen to you, Kirby.
Sure. Well, let me go around the round table because, first of all, there is a lot more money involved in insurance. I think of my grandfather who was a doctor, and he'd get payments. Sometimes they give him a chicken, a can of soup, whatever, because back then you didn't have all the insurance. But now you've got the problem of insurance, but you also got the fact that when a third party is paying for it, I'm not comparison shopping very much either. So what about some of these issues that have been affected by all the money?
Well, let me address what Todd was mentioning there when he says insurance. Ed Annis, who used to be president, and back in the early 60s was president of the American Medical Association, actually debated Walter Reuther on national television on the issue of Medicare and Medicaid as they were being done.
Yes.
I knew Ed. He passed away a little while back, but Ed was a surgeon from Florida, and he said, what really changed was when Medicare and Medicaid passed, because Medicare required the government to pay a doctor the same price whether it was a person just out of medical school or had been practicing for 35 or 40 years. And he said all of a sudden, he said we were doctors, we made fairly good incomes, but all of a sudden you saw these people who were just out of medical school driving Porsches and everything else because they were making so much money by the way the government reimbursed doctors.
Interesting.
And
yes.
He said that's where money became the big driving factor.
Mm-hmm.
As Todd's trying to say, insurance, to the extent that Medicare and Medicaid are insurance, Ed Annis, former president of the AMA, said that's when it happened.
Well, I've never heard that before, but it's very interesting because in some respects, that was a problem government created, right?
And it's still the case today.
Well, of course,
if you're
sure.
a doctor, you can be a terrible doctor or the great doctor. Medicare pays you the same thing.
Wow.
I think there's also the definition of the term, because insurance has become in many cases an entitlement.
Right.
And so true insurance would cover catastrophic coverage, big items. And then I think, a lot of people wanted to go back to paying for the small things and then having the big things covered. But we've become so used to now, every time we go to a doctor for anything, most of it gets paid. And under Obamacare, all of it got paid if it was preventative. So it's turned on its head.
Obamacare's had, because it's so expensive, it's raised those deductibles. So now we're having to pay for the small things out of pocket with insurance there to cover the big things. It's an irony.
Well, it certainly is. We need to take a break, and when we come back, we still have lots of calls. As a matter of fact, someone wanted to know how this bridge policy works, so we have that. Have some wanting to know, well, can we create a different kind of system, and whether or not repeal and replace are going to be damaging to the individual. So we'll certainly, if you stay on the line, we'll get to those phone calls in just a minute. But if you just joined us today, one of the things we're talking about is healthcare, for a very good reason. We thought that today we'd be talking about what the United States Senate passed. It still may have a vote next week or the week after. It may not. And so if you want to read some of the articles we've posted here today, those are available on the website pointofview.net. If you've learned some things today and appreciate the conversation we've had with Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews, can I encourage you, especially during the summer months, to click on that button that says donate, because that's a time when sometimes people go on vacation, and we certainly need to hear from some of you. So if you can help us out financially, we would greatly appreciate it. And if you'd like to join our conversation, we'll take some more phone calls in just a minute. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Point of View turned life right side up for Emily's children. Emily listens in Illinois. She and her husband blissfully sent their children off each day to what she called our small, quaint public school, until Point of View led them to watch the documentary Indoctrination. She said, "We came to realize the need for us to educate our children at home. We want their education to be built on the solid foundation of Scripture." Emily said that would not have happened were it not for Point of View's bold consistency of shining light on public education. Your support for Point of View changes the future for children like Emily's. It leads people to start schools and ministries and businesses that change lives. How has the Truth Team impacted you? Please invest to bring truth to other families like Emily's. Support Truth today. Visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Weekend edition, Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio with us today. We've posted a couple of articles on healthcare. We have some on rolling back regulations. We may get to that. Penna Dexter's commentary today on robots. We'll get to that as well. But at the moment, answering some of the questions you have about healthcare. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, I think this one is certainly aimed at you. We'll go to Jeanette in Texas. Jeanette, thank you for calling today.
Thank you for taking my call.
Yes.
I really appreciate what you guys are doing, because the healthcare business is a real problem for all of us. I'm 61. My husband and I are self-employed. Mm-hmm. We've been on Christian Care Medishare before and went through a rough time and had to drop that. We got a high deductible healthcare insurance premium, and it was $600 with a huge deductible. We dropped it because it just really wasn't working for us. And I heard you talking about the bridge policy. I've never heard of it. I'd like to know if that's something that we can do as a couple, self-employed people, and how do we go about doing that?
Well, Jeanette, you just need to contact a regular insurance agent, and they'll be able to help you with that. I actually had a family-owned one. They were meant to sort of cover somebody if you had coverage, you left a job, you were going to be unemployed for 2 or 3 months or something like that, and then you were going to get a new job. That's kind of what they were meant to do. And that's how I used one for a family policy. It was extremely affordable. We were using faxes then. They faxed me one page. I think it asked the question, do I have AIDS? Does anybody have, heart issues or mental health care issues or drug issues? And I said, no, and sent it back in. And, we got the coverage I think we had it for 6 or 8 weeks or so. But I know there are agents who were selling those for people who did not want to go into Obamacare, and especially if they were getting close to Medicare age, they would sign up for one, keep it for the 6 months, re-up it for another 6 months, and then shift to another policy after that. So you're probably the age that you could take advantage of that if those regulations from HHS aren't still applying, because they were trying to limit people from escaping Obamacare and using that. But just call you an insurance agent. I think they'll probably be able to help you.
Do the doctors like the policy? Because a lot of doctors would not take Obamacare.
And this is primarily only for major accidents or illnesses. So if you're going to go see the doctor for a checkup, or you have a little bruise or something you want to check on, you've got a cold, it's not going to cover you there. This is if you have an accident, an illness comes in, something of that nature, then and especially if you're going to the hospital, that's where the health insurance kicks in. It's not there to cover the routine expenditures that we send. So if you have a prescription drug, it's probably not going to cover that.
I'm very blessed not to have any prescriptions, and I've been very healthy, but I just feel like I'm falling through the cracks, and I should have some kind of insurance. And it sounds like the bridge policy is perfect.
There are a lot of people that live healthy lifestyles, and they don't really feel the need for insurance. And then you get into your 60s, and you realize, okay, well, this is as healthy as I may be living, this is the natural time when things do hit. And I think she's wise in saying, okay, let me have some kind of health care.
Yeah. Yes. And, she mentioned something in passing, which we've talked about before, whether it's Christian Care Medishare, Samaritan's Ministries, or some of these other health sharing policies. They're not insurance. They don't claim to be insurance, but they are options for people that are healthy, that are Christian. You're in a pool, if you will, Dr. Merrill Matthews, with people that agree with you not only theologically, but in terms of all sorts of other kinds of actions that are going to make them probably a lot healthier than some people in the general population.
Indeed, and my wife had her individual policy, canceled 3 times in a row.
Wow.
So she finally went to one of the Christian sharing ministries. We just got our they don't call it a premium, but for lack of a better term, a premium increase. It went up. Are you ready for this? $5 a month.
Oh, boy. See, so there you go. So, again, that's another thing to check out. And if you'd like to ask a question about that, we can give you some more information. Of course, we've posted articles about that in the past and done interviews with some of the leaders in that. But let's get into the issue of Medicaid. Oh, boy. That is the issue of controversy. So let's go to Cindy in Georgia. I think you want to talk about Medicaid, so you have the floor.
Yes, sir. How are you today?
Very good.
Good. The gentleman had mentioned earlier about Medicaid, and I am a grandparent, and I have custody of my 2 grandsons, and both of them are severe hemophiliacs. And 1 vial of medicine for them is $2,000. And I have 2 of them, and they have to be infused every single week, so we're talking $4,000 a week just in their medicines. And if we didn't have Medicaid, I don't know how we would make it, because insurance, we would deplete the insurance so quickly. But the point that I wanted to make about the Medicaid is that I don't really think that it itself is the issue as much as how physicians and hospitals misuse or abuse Medicaid. Because I know that when I go in and I tell them that they're on Medicaid, well, then all of a sudden we're having all kinds of tests ran, we're having x-rays ran. I know what the problem is. The child's having a bleed and he needs to be infused. He doesn't need all of these other additional procedures done, but because they know they can bill the government for it, they're just want to jump on board and do as much as they can. And so over the years, I learned to say, no, we don't need that. And so my point being that I don't really feel like it's the Medicaid itself that's the issue. It's that maybe we're not screening or watching how hospitals and physicians are actually using the Medicaid.
Cindy, there's a couple of points there, and I think it's an interesting, and I think you're right. There is a lot of abuse of Medicaid and Medicare for the same reason. One thing that may be affecting that is if the doctor hasn't done those tests and something were to go wrong, there may be a liability there, so they're trying to cover themselves. That's called defensive medicine, so that a trial lawyer wouldn't come up and say, you didn't do this and you should have done this, and we're going to hit you with a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. So I think that's part of it there. But I think you're also right. As Medicaid and Medicare have lowered reimbursement rates, we strangely don't see the spending going down, and it appears that a lot of times doctors may very well just do more in order to, as a way to try to make up for the losses of the reduced reimbursement rate.
Right. Well, that makes sense as well.
You know, when we come back from the break, though, Dr. Merrill Matthews has I had at least contributed 1 chapter in a book on the issue of Medicaid fraud. And we might give a few examples of individuals that obviously are fraudulent, and yet it took forever for the government to catch some of those individuals. So that's another thing that drives that up. Now, the problem with it is everybody running for president, everybody running for Congress says they're going to try to get rid of waste and fraud. There are some things they can do, but sometimes they never get around to doing that. So I want to talk about that as well, because she's talking about possible abuses, but then there are some where it's not defensive medicine. It's people that have been able to game the system. So I want to get your comments about that as well. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll stay on healthcare a little bit longer, but we do have a few other issues to talk about today, and we will do that as well. So if you'd like to join the conversation, get your phone calls in now, 1-800-351-1212. A little bit later, we're going to move on to a few other topics, including the commentary by Penna Dexter today. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, if you ask people around you about summer jobs that they have had, you will notice a generation gap. The older people will recall some of the jobs they held as teenagers. The younger people may not have had any summer jobs. 40 years ago, nearly 60% of U.S. teenagers were looking for or working at summer jobs. Last year, that percentage was just 35%. Some of that decline is due to the lack of summer jobs, but much of it is due to fewer teenagers looking for a summer job. Carl Vick, writing in Time magazine, says that the Jenkins Boardwalk went looking for seasonal employees last year. In order to fill some 1,200 summer vacancies, they held an Easter time job fair that drew just 400 people. More and more summer jobs are either going unfilled or being filled by foreign students or family and friends. If teenagers aren't working, what are they doing? Of course, some are chilling out in front of television and video games, but many more are busy, but they aren't working at summer jobs. They may be doing volunteer work or doing an internship. Those activities look good on resumes for students trying to get into the college of their choice. Many are taking summer school classes. Summer school used to be for students who did not do well in school and needed enough hours to graduate. Carl Vick explains that many more students are taking courses as an academic accelerator. Last July, 40% of 16 to 19-year-olds were enrolled in summer school. Other students are playing sports. Youth sports have now expanded into a year-round, all-consuming activity for kids and parents. Many simply would not have time for a summer job because their scheduled lives are full of games and tournaments. Sadly, many students won't learn the valuable lessons many of us learned in our summer jobs. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews. On my computer here, I have all the commentaries I've written over the years, and I type in Medicaid or Medicare fraud, and all sorts of articles by Dr. Merrill Matthews show up, or I type in Dr. Merrill Matthews and Medicare and Medicaid fraud. There's one from Forbes. Medicare and Medicaid fraud is costing taxpayers billions of dollars. And, of course, you have contributed a chapter in a book on this and have written lots of articles. This is something which, if some administration was really serious, we could begin to bring about some significant savings. I've seen some of your statistics saying that if you take all the money spent on Medicare divided by the number of people, that's $11,000 per person, per patient. That was a couple of years ago. But not all that's going to those seniors. And when you go to Medicaid, not all of it's going to the people that are under the poverty line, are they?
No, you've got tremendous fraud in Medicare and Medicaid, both programs. And you can find these things available online. The New York Times did a series on this, I believe, about a decade ago. I think it's about 2006, still online, where they looked at Medicaid in New York, Medicaid fraud. And I believe, if I remember right, they said they thought that roughly 40% of their Medicaid budget was going to fraud. They had people out in the Bronx who were standing around there, they called them barkers, yes, who were looking for people with Medicaid cards, and you would go up and see a dentist, and they would they'd give you a little money, and then you'd go down, and the dentist would file all kinds of things. If I remember right from that, there was one dentist, they prosecuted who had something like 991 dental procedures that I think it was she did in one day, including crowns and root canals.
Yes.
This is a very efficient.
991 claims in one day. Could you not know that that's fraud, right?
And somehow or other, the geniuses at Medicaid in New York said, this doesn't sound right to us.
I looked it up. 991 cases in one day for a dentist in New York. And you've pointed out in one of your articles that some of the crime families have gotten into it. One crime family moved from New York to Florida.
The Bonanno crime family moved down to Florida to participate in Medicare fraud because it was the penalties were less than running numbers and drugs in New York. And they had another place they can go. You can go into YouTube and look for 60 Minutes. Did a piece, I think probably like 6-7 years ago now, where they started out by saying, you're going to need to sit down. They went and interviewed some of the people who had been convicted of Medicare and Medicaid fraud. And if I remember right, the person said, we were making $20,000, $30,000 a day. It was hard to make that kind of money out there in the private sector.
Well, just on another note with regard to Medicaid and Obamacare, Obamacare relied on expanding Medicaid and who it covered. And so, I just loved sort of an explanation on going forward what could be done, because it took it from the realm of the poor out of that and expanded the eligibility. So it's hard then, as we mentioned at the beginning of the program, to take things away that you've already bestowed. So what would be a good answer going forward if next week they were to try to put something together?
A couple of things. Number one, Medicaid the states have increasingly put people over into managed care, private sector companies. They charge less, and then they sort of manage that. So my guess is for some of these Medicaid people, the fraud has declined when they go into the managed care company, because the managed care company is trying to keep a lid on that spending.
Very true.
One of the things I would argue that Governor Bredesen did as a governor of Tennessee back around the time Barack Obama came in, Tennessee had decided they were going to go to a system where they had bought into the Clinton health care plan that we can put everybody in managed care and save so much money we'll eventually be able to cover everybody in the state for less money than we're spending right now. We'll start with the Medicaid population. Dramatically expanded their Medicaid population under what was called TennCare, and it was breaking the state.
Yes,
they couldn't afford it.
Yes.
So Governor Bredesen said, we just can't afford this anymore. And I think around 2007, 6 or 7, they decided to change this program. They decided to put a lot of these people who were going to be losing something into a limited benefits plan, which they said we were going to. A lot of them were working, so the state was going to chip in $50 a month, the employer would chip in $50 a month, and the person would chip in $50 a month, so $150 a month, and that was going to provide them with a fairly good basic plan, not nearly as comprehensive as Medicaid, but it was said this is something the state can afford, but it's going to be a limited benefits plan. That ended up making the left so angry. Governor Bredesen was going to be on the short list for his nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services when the left got wind that he was willing to go with a limited benefits plan rather than full comprehensive Medicaid, took him off the short list.
And that's something. So again, there are all sorts of political issues as well. We get questions all the time, Penna, about we got smart people. Can't we get people together and work this out? But if you don't have any kind of bipartisan attempt, or if you stray a little bit off of the liberal plantation, you just get off the short list and you don't even have a chance to reach across the aisle.
Well, Obamacare put people on Medicaid, and now there are some of the senators that oppose this repeal or any of the replacement plans are saying, well, we can't take people off Medicaid. That would just be disastrous for me politically. And that's what's happening. And so there has to be a solution for that. And it's going to sound it's hard to make a soundbite to make that sound palatable.
Well, a couple of things. Number one, the people on Medicaid typically don't vote as much.
That's very true.
That tends to be the case.
I think the senators are still worried about them.
Oh, I think it's absolutely right. But the other thing is, I mean, depending on the disaster, they may not be Secretary of HHS at some time, but there are ways to provide a much thinner Medicaid benefit to people that would not cost as much as a transition to something else if you give the states the freedom to be able to do that. And what the Republicans' plan is trying to do is to give the states that freedom, and so far they haven't been able to get that yet.
Let's take another phone call, and we're going to get into some other topics in a minute, but we'll stay on healthcare for a little bit longer. We'll go to Marie in Texas. Marie, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just wanted to ask the gentleman there, I'm 69 years old, and I need to retire, but I've only been with my company for like 9 years, so I won't have a big retirement from them. I have already started my Social Security. My husband is in poor health, and we have, lots of prescriptions and stuff. Like one of my prescriptions, if I didn't have insurance, would cost me $375 a month. It only cost me $40 a month with my insurance.
Mm-hmm. But
so
Marie, you're on Medicare, are you not?
But no, because my Blue Cross Blue Shield is the primary. And so Medicare says I won't go on to Medicare until I retire.
Right.
And then they become the primary, and my other insurance would be the secondary.
That's right. And what you'll want to do then is sign up for the Medicare Prescription Drug Benefit Part D, and you will have prescription drug coverage there. It will cost a little bit to do that, but given your income and so forth, it won't cost very much. But you will have a plan to fall back on under Medicare.
Now, well, that's what I was trying to figure out, what plan I would want, because I could keep my insurance that I have, except for it cost me an arm and a leg, and I couldn't afford it.
Yeah, you don't want to keep your insurance.
I don't pay anything.
If you're,
go ahead.
Right. If you're retiring, you don't want to keep that insurance because it will cost you quite a bit, and just go on to Medicare Part D. That's why that's our senior safety net program with the prescription drug benefit now.
That may be one of the few successes of Medicare, wouldn't you say? When it was first proposed, a lot of people said, oh, it's going to be a disaster. It's really one of the few success stories we have, isn't it?
And I wasn't a big fan of it because they expanded to everybody rather than just lower income people, because at the time you had roughly 75% of seniors had a prescription drug benefit. But Denny Hastert, who's had his own issues here lately.
Yes, he is.
Denny Hastert was speaker, and we asked about this, and I was told the speaker wants this to go to everybody, and so it is going to go to everybody. So I wasn't a big fan of it for that reason, but it has worked fairly well.
Yes, and again, that's another issue that we haven't really talked about, because under certain kinds of restrictions, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, Obamacare, certain drugs are on the formulary, some are not. And there are some people that say, I need this one. The generic doesn't work as well, right?
Right. And they want to, the government likes to move to formularies because it gives them a certain leverage to be able to either negotiate a lower discount, or what is increasingly happening is to tell the drug company, if you want to be on the formulary, you've got to give us a rebate. And that ends up becoming, if not a tax, a kind of graft that the politicians use.
Interesting. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I wanted to change topics a little bit, simply because one of the things we talked about earlier in the week is the various successes that Donald Trump's administration is able to achieve that you never hear about. One of those is, if this article is correct, and I believe that it is, rolled back more than 800 Obama-era regulations. So I want to talk about that for just a minute. But also, what is the left doing sort of behind the scenes to countermand that in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals? So I thought we'd talk about that for just a minute, because it's something that isn't covered in the mainstream press, but you'll hear it here. And Penna Dexter's commentary and a whole lot of other issues in this last half hour. So again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Penna Dexter, Dr. Merrill Matthews in studio. Guess we should at least acknowledge that O.J. Simpson is going to be free, and Sean Spicer has been let go. So I think Buddy Matthews had it best. You know, the juice is loosed and the spice is out of our life right now. So then we at least acknowledge some of the things that we're not going to focus much of our time and attention on. But
right.
Yeah, there are things we should focus on, and we're going to get into this issue of regulations in a minute, but I've got a leftover phone call on the issue of Medicare, especially Part D. So Sherry in South Carolina, WAGP, I think you have a question for us.
Yes, I do. Thank you. I have been on Medicare for 10 years and my husband 14 years. We have Part B, but we have never signed up for Part D. And I have been told that if we sign up, the later we sign up, that there is a penalty involved because we didn't do it initially.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so what kind of a penalty is that, you know?
It's 1% per month. That's accumulative. So if you're if for every month you didn't do it when you were eligible, and I'm assuming you're eligible, the plan went into effect in 2006. Actually went into effect in the beginning of 2006. So it would be 1% a month, 12% a year, and they keep adding that up until you finally decide to do it. And that's intended to discourage people from waiting until the last minute. Then now I've got cancer, or now I've got this major medical condition, so I'm going to sign up for it then. So it was an attempt to try to limit the adverse selection that we've been talking about and get as many people as possible into the plan.
So is there any other prescription plan that we might sign up for? Because this sounds like it could be pretty expensive. My husband is 14 years into Medicare now. But you said it started in 2006. So that would be 11 years for him then.
Yeah, depending upon your income, the federal subsidies on this are pretty heavy. That is to say, typically a person who's sort of lower or moderate income as a senior, which most seniors are, the taxpayers subsidize 75% of the cost of that plan. So you're only paying actually 25% of it. So it might be that even with the penalties, you still would be better off than trying to buy a private plan. I don't know that there are a lot of private plans out there for people your age, because the vast majority of people sign up for Medicare Part D, so there isn't always a lot of options. The insurance companies feel like, well, there's not going to be much demand for it because most people will go into the Part D program.
Well, again, if you want to correspond with Dr. Merrill Matthews or read a lot of the articles you've written, that's all at the Institute for Policy Innovation, which is IPI.org. So, again, that would be a great opportunity. Penna Dexter, for just a few minutes, I wanted to cover some things that you just never hear anybody cover. And that is, we have all sorts of people saying, well, Donald Trump's not effective. And, of course, we posted at the first part of the week all the things that the Trump administration had been able to accomplish up until May. This one was done by UPI, but there are others that you can find on the website and all the rest. And a lot of this success has been really behind the scenes because, as we will know, every day the mainstream press talks about Russia. And so many times we are even tired of talking about Russia. But I wanted to, and I posted this article in a report. The Trump administration said it has withdrawn 469 planned regulatory actions that were part of the Obama administration. And then officials are considering 391 active regulatory proceedings. So in a sense, you could say the Trump administration from January to now in July have essentially rolled back 800 Obamacare regulations.
Yeah, he promised that he would, and I think he may have even issued something official saying that he would roll back 2 for every new one. And it turns out it's 16 for every new one. That's how fast they've been working.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, and the head of the Office of I think it's Information and Regulatory Affairs said that Obama is going after the regulatory state, and he really is big time. So that's one big accomplishment. I think another important thing that came out this week was sort of a survey of what people cared about. And 35% of those surveyed have put healthcare as their number one issue. Only 6% put Russia there. I thought that was important. But some of the issues that were important to people, healthcare way up at the top.
Right.
Jobs and unemployment, we're second, and then terrorism, and it goes on to immigration. But Russia was way down there. Trade was way down there too.
Yeah, and even climate change and all the rest of those. And so I think our friends at the Media Research Center, if I remember that study, found that the things that were number 6 on the list, 7 on the list, were the ones were covered every single day by the mainstream media. And the things that we're talking about today, which were number 1 or 2 on the list, were rarely covered. So,
and I would argue it's a good thing the media isn't covering it, because if they were covering it, they would be saying, Donald Trump is rolling back these regulations. We're all going to die.
Yes.
So
it's good he's doing it quietly.
So what do you call rolling back 800 regulations? A good start.
A good start. Now, let me try to also really talk about something we talk about so often, Penna, when Kelly Shackelford is here, and that is the importance of who is on the judiciary, because the D.C. court, you have the different circuit courts, but then you have the one in the District of Columbia. But over time, that particular court has a lot more progressives than others. And so just recently, they actually prevented Scott Pruitt, who heads up the EPA, from reevaluating some of those rules which were implemented under the Obama administration. So this looks like it's the latest strategy by the liberal left, by the progressives, to use the courts, no surprise there, to actually try to deal with some of this rollback that is taking place. Because if you look at this article we've posted, and I really do encourage you to read this, because, again, these are the things that aren't covered by the mainstream press. If you go all the way to the bottom of this article, the administration's efforts have already saved billions of dollars in regulatory cost. A lot of the cost of what we pay for isn't in the taxes. We have Tax Freedom Day, which always lands about in April, which means up until that time, you're working for the federal government and the state government with all your taxes. But cost of government day doesn't happen until right about now, because all the rest of that cost are the regulatory cost. And so, again, rolling back some of the regulations means you're going to have an opportunity to have more job creation and perhaps a lot more flexibility in a free market.
Absolutely. The regulations have a cost, both in out of pocket to have somebody monitor that, make sure the attorneys say you're complying with the regulations, and with the time factor that you involve in that's involved in spending, trying to make sure that you're complying with it. And many times there's a cost in just out-of-pocket cost that you're trying to buy whatever you need. The regulations say you have to. It's very costly. It is typically done in secret by the agencies that implement these things, and you find out that's going to be happening. So the rollback is I would argue, a great start.
One of the questions that we always ask is certainly about health care, but you've also looked at this issue of energy policy. And without some of this rollback of regulations, I would say that the coal industry would be doomed. But where are we in terms of some of these regulations, in terms of fracking and coal mining and those kinds of things? Well,
the EPA has been a very strong regulatory body under Barack Obama, and even to a large extent under George W. Bush. Under Scott Pruitt, I think we'll see some of those things sort of mellow a little bit. They're allowing fracking now. They're allowing the export of liquefied natural gas, because we're making so much of it now because of fracking. That's becoming an export for us. We are allowing more drilling out there, and the president has made it clear he wants to expand drilling on federal lands and offshore. That was really curtailed to a large extent under Barack Obama, because it took so long to get it approved that drillers would just simply go to either state lands or private lands because they could get it approved much faster.
I think I would also argue that pulling out of the international treaty, the international regulations, if you will,
very good.
Well, it's huge for us, for business, and for just saving money in the regulatory state. And I think it demonstrated Donald Trump's commitment to lowering regulations. I mean, we don't need an international body telling us how to regulate our businesses.
For all the complaining of the left, the Paris Agreement was a huge wealth transfer of us to a lot of other countries, which is one of the reasons why they were so involved and interested in making sure we stayed in, because we had essentially pledged hundreds of billions of dollars to transfer over to them to help them supposedly fight climate change, but I think in many cases buy them new limousines.
Wow. Let's take a break. And as we go to this break, we always hear Penna Dexter's commentary. Let me first of all suggest that if you haven't signed up to receive the commentaries, mine come to your inbox Monday through Friday. Penna's that we've aired today on the program comes on Saturday. But this one on robot employment, it's more than you think. It's not just robots. It's what happens when you raise the minimum wage so high that you really can't afford to have individuals, and what are some of the things that are happening. So we want to talk about that for just a minute. If you're online, you can listen to the commentary. If you have access to a computer, of course, you can read her commentary. We'll come back and talk with Penna Dexter about her latest commentary right here on Point of View, right after these messages.
Calls for $15 hourly minimum wage laws are being answered in certain places across the country. Just this July 1st, 17 states and localities increased their wage floors. Seattle started phasing in a $15 minimum 3 years ago, and there's little to celebrate. It's hurting low-wage workers. A University of Washington study shows business establishments are simply cutting workers' hours to compensate. The average low-wage worker is losing $125 a month. San Francisco's $15 minimum is nearly phased in. Other Bay Area cities are following suit. One result? Restaurants are closing in droves. A joint study done by researchers at Harvard Business School and Mathematica Policy Research found that for every $1 per hour hike in the minimum wage, there's a 14% increased likelihood that a restaurant rated 3.5 stars on Yelp will go out of business. The minimum wage push has many large restaurant chains beginning the automation process. Kiosks popping up at Panera Bread, McDonald's, and Wendy's mean customers barely interact with a human. There's even a meat flipping robot that can put out 360 evenly cooked burgers in an hour. Andy Putzer was CEO for 17 years of CKE Restaurants, the parent company of Hardee's and Carl's Jr. He is outspoken about his concern that government policies are destroying entry-level jobs by giving businesses an incentive to automate at an accelerated pace. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed, Mr. Putzer wrote, "It's no surprise that restaurants are rolling out the robots." Economist Walter Williams points out that the average wage for a cashier is $10 an hour. That works out to $21,000 per year. Not a fortune, but better, writes Dr. Williams, than going on welfare, needing unemployment compensation or idleness. Plus, these jobs, often the first jobs for young people, teach them the importance of soft skills like punctuality and clear communication. Minimum wage laws destroy these opportunities. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and Penna Dexter and Dr. Merrill Matthews here. And Penna, your piece, robot employment, and robotics, and the possibility that this could change everything. But part of the reason why we're seeing robots, and I was driving in Missouri the other day, and I came into a McDonald's, and I said, there it is, the kiosk. There's only one person behind the counter. It's going to take all the orders. It probably did it more efficiently. It took my credit card. I really did not have to talk to anybody other than the person that handed me or my order. That's the future if indeed these various minimum wage laws keep going higher and higher every year.
Yeah, it's a call across the country in various places for $15 hour minimum wage, hourly minimum wage. And many places are actually answering that call. And I think probably one of the most famous ones is Seattle. They did a study at the University of Washington showing that business establishments are actually just cutting workers' hours to compensate with that. And the figure they put on it was that the average low-wage worker is losing $125 a month. Well, in San Francisco, they've also had big-time minimum wage laws, and it's expanding to cities across the Bay Area, and restaurants are closing. Some of the big chains, though, rather than closing, are doing something different, and that's why Andy Putzer, who was CEO of CKE Restaurants, they are the parent company of Hardee's and Carl's Jr. He's retired from that, but he calls it Robot Employment Act. Really, the minimum wage laws are the Robot Employment Act. And so we've got companies now like Panera Bread, McDonald's, and Wendy's. They have kiosks, and you don't even have much human interaction anymore, which means you're not hiring very many humans.
Right.
And there's a meat flipping robot now for fast food restaurants. So, you know, this was probably coming anyway, but it's being accelerated because of these minimum wage laws. And so I just, I have a lot of problems with minimum wage laws, but that's one of them. The idea that it's just going to employ fewer people. And, when you look at these first jobs, and you had a commentary today that was so good about summer jobs.
Summer jobs.
And we're, for lots of reasons,
Very
summer
few
jobs
teenagers going and getting to summer jobs anymore.
Well, it's the entry-level jobs that are hurt by minimum wage laws. It's not people that need to live on that money. It's a lot of young people sometimes, maybe living in their parents' home, maybe students, maybe people who don't need as much to live on. They want to get a job. They want some kind of a job. Well, these jobs, because of the companies have to pay so much, they're going to make do with less, either by getting robots, closing up shop completely, or just making do with fewer people. And so minimum wage laws actually sometimes hurt the people that they were meant to help.
When you look at this in the broader context, you can understand why Mark Zuckerberg, speaking at Harvard's commencement, talked about this idea of a universal basic income, because he's saying, well, if this continues on, robots will take over all sorts of jobs. There won't be enough jobs. So we'll just have to provide everybody with kind of a basic level of income. I disagree with that, but it's interesting to see that some of these people are just sort of accepting the idea that robots are going to take over all of our jobs. Well,
they may certainly perform some tasks, but that means there are other tasks to be performed. But to Penna's point, if the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, it's higher in some states and cities, but that's about $15,000 a year. You double that to $15 an hour, you're up to about $30,000 a year. You add in a $4,000 or $5,000 a year mandatory health insurance from Obamacare, that gets you as an employer maybe $34,000, $35,000 a year. If there's any other benefits and so forth, you've got to pay the FICA taxes on top of that. All of a sudden, an employee becomes a middle-income employee and not a low-income employee.
Right.
And that at $35,000 a year, some robots become affordable, and they never demand a raise, and they don't want time off.
They don't need health care.
Yeah, they certainly don't. And as I've said before on this program, when I first started working, I wasn't worth $15 an hour, and Buddy Matthews said, I don't think you're still worth $15 an hour. So the problem is that we went, to use my commentary for just a minute, we're going to put Penna's commentary and mine together. We, just a few years ago, had 60% of teenagers, and I'm used teenager in the broad sense because it went also into the 20s, that were either in a summer job or looking for a summer job. The most recent statistics, only about 35%. You say, well, what's going on? Well, first of all, there aren't as many jobs because of robotics, or also because they can't afford to hire so many at minimum wage. The other part of that is that a lot of young people are going to summer school because that looks better on the resume. It used to be summer school was for people that couldn't, do very well in school. Some of them, if they are affluent or come from affluent homes, they don't have to work at all, but they work very hard because they're in an internship, an unpaid internship, or they're doing volunteer work, so that looks better on a college resume. You add all of that together and you recognize that a whole generation of young people are never having an experience of a summer job, and that's where you learn things like getting up on time, learning manners, having a work ethic. All those things are beginning to evaporate from our society.
Having taxes taken out of your pay.
And learn a whole lot more about why maybe I would want to be a little more free market and a little bit less socialistic and all the rest.
I think just communication, too. Communication with customers, communication with bosses, your communication skills. And, if you've got all you're talking to is a robot, in the restaurant. I mean, our society is becoming less and less communicative.
That's true.
In the person-to-person way. I guess that's probably a subject for a whole other show. But there are things you learn in your first job that help you in your future jobs. And, even there was a piece in the Wall Street Journal written by by Andy Putzer, who was CKE CEO for a while.
Yes.
He started out working in a fast food restaurant, worked his way up to being CEO of this restaurant company. And, he talked about the things he learned early on as he was moving up the ladder. Of course, I mean, you've got to have some special skills to get that high. But we all need to learn those skills of working.
Right.
And when you begin to squeeze those jobs out, and you can only get a job that pays a lot, you may not get a job at all.
Let's take a phone call. We'll go to Arizona, KNLB. Trina, I think you'd like to maybe get the final word in the day. What would you like to add?
I was just kind of thinking about, there's been not a lot of jobs where we're at because it's a rural area.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband basically just reinvented the way he was doing things.
Bingo.
As far as not wanting to work for someone, he works for himself. And he hears a lot of people saying, well, there's no work out there, but he has been so busy that he can't even think straight.
Yeah, entrepreneurial activity would be outstanding.
things.
Yeah, reinvent yourself and recognize that, yes, robots are going to take away some of the menial jobs. There are all sorts of opportunities for job creation, and many times it's to actually follow your vision, follow your passion, and go out there and make a difference in the world.
Yeah, and you talked about Zuckerberg saying that we're going to have a minimum income that we provide to people. Well, Merrill Matthews just said no. There are other jobs that are going to grow from us being more automated. And that's what happens. It usually starts with small businesses, finding out a need. Okay, the robots need to have, be maintained, and they need to have, this and that to make them more efficient. So I'm going to have a small business. I'm going to start that business. We're going to provide that service. We're going to need more and more people to do it, and we're going to grow. And, it may be that your husband, Trina, will end up being able to employ more people to take some of the pressure off of himself.
But Trina's husband has it exactly right. If I could give some information or some wisdom to young people, it would be always look for a way to reinvent yourself. You may not have to, but the time may come when you do. So look for ways to do that, because you may find yourself needing to do so at some time.
Let me mention again, Penna Dexter's commentary, Robot Employment, on the website today. And if you have not signed up to receive the commentaries, I would encourage you to do so, and it'll arrive in your inbox tomorrow. Dr. Merrill Matthews, again, I also encourage people to go to ipi.org. We've talked about healthcare today, but there are so many other issues that you and your colleagues write about. So thank you once again for joining us here on Point of View.
Thank you.
I am out of time. We're not out of content, but we will simply have to set that aside for next week. Have a great weekend. I want to thank Andrew and Elisa for their help behind the scenes. Enjoy the weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.
I'm sure you've heard the definition of insanity, to keep on doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. Right now, I want to talk to someone who has listened to Point of View for a long time. Is that you? Have you been listening somewhat regularly for months, maybe even years? All right, good. When was the last time that you made the effort, the sacrifice, to invest in the work of Kerby and Point of View? If you're concerned about the direction of the nation, something needs to change. Point of View wants to expand its reach, to add to the number of stations airing the program, to change more lives that will change the nation. But that won't happen if you keep listening, but don't give back. Please, now is the time. Step up. Give online at pointofview.net or using the Point of View radio app. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or again, visit pointofview.net, click on Become a Monthly Partner, and you be the change that America desperately needs. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.